It's my pleasure today to have Rebecca Jacoby, the CIO and Senior VP at Cisco, as my guest. Welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Well, it's really my pleasure, and it's especially a pleasure to be speaking with you over a Cisco product, which is the telepresence system. And we're literally thousands of miles apart as we're having this conversation. I've just begun a series of interviews for the CIOZone, which will be focused on interviewing CIOs and leaders in companies that have chosen telepresence as their system for collaboration and video conferencing. So I am delighted to be able to kick off the series by actually speaking to you first and helping us get some context and a little bit of information around this. So again, just delighted to have you on the show today.
Thanks. I'm happy to be here and happy to talk about telepresence. It's one of many technologies that both Cisco produces and I need to deploy in my job. And one of the really fun parts of my job is that we get to be sort of a leading edge customer for Cisco. So we've been deploying telepresence for just a little over 3 years now since our first production implementation in Cisco IT, and we now have close to 700 units deployed globally.
Wow.
So really that is by far the largest installation of telepresence in the world, and we need to stay on the leading edge of the technology and how it's used, and not just the technology itself, but sort of the processes associated with maintaining and operating it, and making and even innovating for new uses for the actual technology in the context of business. So it's a lot of fun. It's great technology.
And I think it's wonderful that you've got the responsibility of being an early adopter, as it were, because it's really not simply an out-of-the-box solution that you can plug in. Of course, you can plug it in and get a picture, but getting the value is not the same as getting a clear picture.
Right.
And I'm sure that as you've used it, you've had some ideas as to some of the benefits and maybe even some of the challenges that you'd have around adoption, because it's like any other new technology. And you've had the chance to solve those issues as well. Can you tell us a little bit about what your expectations were at the beginning and how they turned out as you started to become a real user?
Well, 3 years is a long time in a technology life cycle.
It is.
So,
it is.
The technology has both progressed and also our use of it. So when the telepresence team, the product team, was really producing this product, they centered the entire thing around the experience.
Right.
I think this is just a really key philosophy around it because, we all know video conferencing is not really always that pleasant of an experience, when the voice and the video are garbled or they're not in sync, or I don't know what kind of experiences you've had, but one of my favorites is blowing at the mic in the ceiling, and these types of things. So you see a lot of unused equipment, and when people look at video conferencing specifically, they often have trouble justifying it because they know that they've used solutions in the past that don't have the adoption. It doesn't get used the way they expect it to, and maybe with the utilization rates that they use to justify the expense, right?
Right.
So this has been really an interesting technology in that regard because it's such a natural experience. Once you've used it, it's always kind of fun. The first time people use it, they have the same look on their face. They just have this sort of, surprised look on their face at really the clarity of the experience. And so
exactly.
Once people use it, kind of getting them to want to use it more hasn't really been a challenge. But we specifically saw when we first started, in order to maintain the experience, it was a fairly complex installation to make sure you had the right, air conditioning, lighting, everything else in the room. And so we went through a complex process where we installed in very specific sites. And we went out, I think, initially with on the order of about 30 machines. And we saw pretty good utilization, but we saw a step function jump in the utilization when we started deploying in global locations. So that was, I think, a big deal for us to have deployments all over Europe,
right.
In India, in China, in Japan, and we actually got utilization rates of about 60% fairly rapidly as we deployed globally, and that's based on a 50-hour work week in the enterprise. So essentially, they get 30 hours a week use on average.
Wow.
On average, there are sites that have over 100% utilization on an ongoing basis. And now we have, like I mentioned, we have close to 700 units deployed, and we're still getting that utilization rate.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah. So some of the big steps that have changed over time is the installation experience has been simplified. The product itself has progressed to where the newer shipments have been much easier to install, much less cumbersome in terms of what you need to do to the facilities and those types of things. So that's a really nice progression to lower the total cost of installation. But in addition to that, we've gotten so many ideas from our customers in terms of how we could use it differently. The original solution sort of is a conference between individuals like you and I are having right now, and we focused first on customers, first on how do we meet with our customers, secondly, how did we reduce internal travel in the company and have internal global meetings on it, but really sort of conference room style meetings. And what we're now doing with much of the deployment is sort of two other major vectors. One is how can you actually deploy this in the home as an enterprise remote worker solution. We've had situations where we've done that ad hoc, where we've had executives have a medical reason why they needed to be at home, but they could still work. And so, set that up ad hoc and have that become their office. So one thing is that kind of remote worker. The second one is an extensive use of the technology as part of a set of collaboration technologies, right. Changing the complete nature of conference rooms, not used for one-on-one or executive meetings, but used for truly collaborative meetings. So product design, IT operations, that type of a collaborative setting. And we got that idea from one of our customers, and that's a very interesting use of it. But our customers have every idea you can imagine, from remote healthcare to I remember one customer saying, "Hey, I could choose fabric samples on this thing. The clarity is so great." So
that's true.
You start to see it being used in different contexts.
Do you have a very rigorous process for evaluating the outcomes of your use and whatnot, so that you can actually learn faster than, let's say, your average user who's not so interested in the details?
Obviously there's always one or two overarching metrics that you really justify where you're going with the product. And so utilization is really something we measure very rigorously, exactly by unit and by site, and we actually look at why it's being used. So we do like a small survey methodology where we can look at why it's being used, because employees will come up with their own good reasons to use these things.
I'm sure.
So, and then you want to sort of share best practices. So those kinds of metrics, we keep a very rigorous dashboard that we publish online. But even there's interesting things about the experience that we watch constantly, like how easy is it to schedule, and what are the other technologies people want to be integrated with. So obviously WebEx, for example, is also our technology, and having that actually be able to be integrated with one click on the phone here, those kinds of things. We're measuring how do we actually bring those technologies into play.
Are you finding more people integrating the telepresence with the other technologies? I know that your protocols for doing that have recently been upgraded and released.
Right. So the interoperability is pretty important on this, right? And it has everything to do with what do you actually use the technology for, right? So essentially you're using it for meeting-type communications more often than not. And so combining that with other meeting products like WebEx being able to share, slides and what you're doing. That's kind of a critical interoperability.
Right.
A second critical interoperability is really, and this has progressed over the last year and a half, is a business-to-business exchange, which, this is going to be really great. You were mentioning Marriott. If in an implementation where somebody can go in and buy just time in the telepresence room,
right.
and then I can communicate to them business to business. The kind of exchanges that you enable in that regard it multiplies exponentially, right? And so that interoperability across businesses and in some instances with other similar technologies, it isn't always ideal to say, you can't really necessarily get the whole HD experience in every single location, so how can you interoperate with other technologies that you're capable of deploying to certain sites and situations, right? So that kind of interoperability opens up many, many more possibilities.
Sure.
And that kind of technology is becoming more and more prevalent.
Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if there are meetings being held where people are looking at it on a cell phone. And and there's nothing wrong with that. Obviously, not everyone has 3 high-definition screens in front of them, and they don't necessarily need that. It's much better to be part of it than not to be.
Exactly. And, the combination of WebEx and telepresence is pretty powerful because you can access on your cell phone WebEx very easily.
Yes.
And then that it can be directly connected into the telepresence with essentially one click on the phone. So that's that interoperability is very key. And in our new conference, I mentioned we just have recently started standing up a whole different style of conference room. This is another fun part of my job. I volunteer IT to be the guinea pig on these things, right? And so we've got, and then I try to keep it a secret so we know we can use it. But we just stood up a really great conference room that's a completely different style than the one you're sitting in, not that kind of a table, but it's a bunch of higher tables so that if you're standing or sitting, you have the same experience.
Right.
Telepresence unit in the corner and a smart whiteboard on the side and then a special projection unit actually in the center of the room. One wall is completely blank. So what happens is the main PC that's being used in the session is actually projected on that wall. And in many cases, there's multiple people attending by WebEx. And so their little video is sitting right there on the wall, and people are sitting in the room, and the sound is set up so that the camera and the sound moves toward whoever's speaking.
Right.
And then there's a smart whiteboard that happens to be integrated with WebEx. So when someone writes on the board, it shows up on everyone's PC that's participating in the session. So if you start to think about a full set of collaboration technologies that's brought together, it's quite an experience. And the voice and the video is all integrated, so it gives you a really seamless experience. It's quite productive.